Assalamu alaikum, my dear friend. How are you? Really? Not the answer you give people when they ask casually. I mean, how is your heart? Because maybe lately something has changed. People who used to call you suddenly became quiet. A friendship you thought would last forever feels different. Someone you deeply cared about started pulling away. And somehow, you are the one sitting there wondering, what did I do wrong? Maybe you tried to fix it. Maybe you sent the message. Maybe you waited for their call. Maybe you replayed old conversations in your mind, searching for the moment everything changed. But what if I told you? Maybe this season is not only about losing people. Maybe it is about discovering something you could never have discovered while everything around you was loud. Ibn Arabi's spiritual perspective invites us to look at the journey of the soul differently. Sometimes, what hurts us on the outside exposes something hidden on the inside. And perhaps that is why certain seasons of life become strangely quiet. Not because Allah has forgotten you, not because you are unworthy of love, and not because you are destined to walk alone forever, but because there are moments when the heart needs less noise, so it can finally hear what it has been avoiding. So if you are watching this while feeling distant from people you once felt close to, stay until the end. Because there is one question we rarely ask when someone leaves. Did I only lose them, or did their absence reveal something about me? And if you value reflections that make you look deeper into your heart, subscribe and stay with us. Because sometimes, the most important journey begins when everyone else becomes quiet. Maybe the hardest part of losing someone is not losing them. It is losing the version of yourself that existed when they were around. Think about it. There was a time when you laughed at the same things. You had the same conversations. You went to the same places. You expected the same future. And because that person was part of your world, you slowly became comfortable with a certain version of yourself. Maybe you were the one who always said yes, the one who stayed silent to avoid conflict, the one who needed someone's attention to feel valuable, the one who constantly explained yourself because you were afraid of being misunderstood. Then something changed. Maybe your faith became deeper. Maybe your priorities changed. Maybe you started questioning things you once accepted without thinking. Maybe you simply became tired of pretending to be okay. And suddenly, some people no longer felt as close. This can be incredibly painful, because the heart often interprets distance as rejection. You think, they changed. But sometimes, you changed first. And that does not automatically mean you became better than them. It simply means you are no longer standing in exactly the same place. This is where the spiritual journey becomes uncomfortable. Because growth does not always feel like gaining something. Sometimes growth feels like outgrowing something. A friendship, a habit, a pattern, a need for approval, or even an identity you spent years building. And perhaps the deepest question is not, why did they leave me? Perhaps it is, who was I when I needed them to stay? That question can change everything, because maybe you don't actually miss the relationship as much as you think. Maybe you miss feeling wanted. Maybe you miss having someone to text. Maybe you miss the certainty. Maybe you miss the person you believed you were when they were beside you. And this is why separation can become a mirror. It shows you what you were depending on. It reveals what you were afraid to lose. It exposes the places inside your heart where another human being had quietly taken a position that only Allah should occupy. But be careful here. This does not mean every person who leaves your life was sent away by Allah so that you can become spiritually superior. Life is more complicated than that. Some relationships end because of misunderstandings. Some end because people make mistakes. Some need repair. Some need boundaries. And some simply reach their natural ending. The lesson is not always, they had to leave. Sometimes the lesson is simply, what is this experience teaching me about my heart? Because perhaps the real transformation begins when you stop obsessing over who walked away and start noticing who you are becoming in their absence. And maybe that is the version of you Allah has been quietly calling you toward all along. There is a moment in every spiritual journey when the world outside becomes quieter and something inside you becomes impossible to ignore. This is where the deeper teachings associated with Ibn Arabi become especially meaningful. Ibn Arabi spent much of his spiritual thought exploring the relationship between the human being, the heart, and the divine. And one idea stands out again and again. The journey to Allah is not simply about changing your surroundings. It is about discovering what is happening inside you. Because you can change your city, change your friends, change your routine, and still carry the same fears, attachments, and wounds inside your heart. You can leave one place and still remain trapped in the same inner world. That is why sometimes, when people begin disappearing from your life, the most important question is not, why are they leaving? It is, what is their absence revealing? Imagine someone who always made you feel important. You depended on their messages. Their attention made you feel secure. Their presence made you believe you mattered. Then suddenly, they become distant. At first, you think the problem is them. You want answers. You want closure. You want them to come back. But slowly, another realization may appear. Their absence has revealed how deeply you were depending on their presence to feel whole. And this is where separation becomes an inner journey. Not because every separation is automatically a divine sign, but because every experience can become a mirror if you are willing to look. Ibn Arabi's spiritual worldview constantly brings us back toward deeper awareness of the heart. The outer event may be simple. Someone leaves, a door closes, a friendship changes, a plan fails. But the inner response can reveal an entire world. Fear, attachment, pride, expectation, love, need, trust, and sometimes, tawakkul. That is the mystery. The same event can either harden your heart or awaken it. You can spend months asking, why did Allah let this happen to me? Or you can eventually ask, what is Allah teaching me through what happened? Those two questions may sound similar, but they take the heart in completely different directions. The first keeps you staring at the closed door. The second makes you look at what is happening within you. And perhaps that is one of the most powerful shifts in spiritual growth. You stop measuring your life only by what you receive and start paying attention to what you are becoming. Maybe the person who left taught you patience. Maybe the friendship that ended taught you boundaries. Maybe the rejection taught you that your worth cannot depend on someone's approval. Maybe the silence forced you to make dua with a sincerity you had forgotten. And perhaps this is why some seasons feel so strange. The people around you become fewer, but the questions inside you become deeper. You begin to realize, not every empty space needs to be filled immediately. Some empty spaces are invitations to listen, to reflect, to return to Allah. And maybe the greatest transformation is not when everyone finally comes back. Maybe it is when you reach a place where you can say, Ya Allah, I don't understand why this happened, but I trust you enough to let this experience transform me. That is where the outer journey becomes an inner journey. And that may be where your real story begins. At first, being alone can feel like a punishment. The room feels quieter. Your phone feels strangely silent. You notice who stopped checking on you. You notice who no longer asks how you are. And at night, when everything becomes still, your mind starts replaying conversations you wish you could change. You wonder, why am I going through this? But then something begins to shift. Not suddenly, not dramatically, very quietly. You stop reaching for your phone every few minutes. You stop checking whether someone has seen your message. You stop trying to convince people to understand you. And one day, you realize the silence that once frightened you has become peaceful. This is the moment solitude stops feeling like punishment and starts becoming a place where you can finally hear yourself. There is an important difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness says, something is missing. Solitude asks, what have I been unable to hear? When you are constantly surrounded by people, conversations, notifications, expectations, and opinions, it can become difficult to recognize your own inner state. You can be surrounded by hundreds of people and still have no idea what is happening inside your heart. But when everything becomes quiet, things begin to surface. The fears you avoided, the questions you postponed, the attachments you called love, the approval you called confidence, and sometimes the distance you called abandonment. This is why solitude can become uncomfortable before it becomes beautiful. Because silence does not create every thought inside you. Sometimes it simply reveals what was already there. And this is where the spiritual journey becomes deeply personal. You begin to sit with yourself without constantly distracting yourself. You make dua without performing for anyone. You remember Allah when nobody is watching. You begin to discover a kind of worship that does not need an audience. And slowly, your relationship with Allah becomes less about asking, why did you take this person away? And more about saying, Ya Allah, teach me what I need to learn from this. That is a completely different heart. But remember something important. Islam does not teach us that everyone should isolate themselves. People are a blessing. Family is a blessing. Friendship is a blessing. Love is a blessing. The goal is not to become someone who needs nobody. The goal is to become someone whose heart does not collapse when people change. There is a difference. You can love someone deeply without making them your entire world. You can miss someone without losing yourself. You can hope someone returns while still trusting Allah if they don't. And perhaps that is the freedom many people never experience. Because eventually, you stop saying, I need everyone to stay. And your heart begins saying, Ya Allah, let whoever is good for me remain, and give me peace with whatever you choose. That is when solitude changes. The empty room is still empty. The phone may still be quiet. But your heart is no longer begging the silence to end. Because somewhere along the way, you discovered that being alone is not the same as being abandoned. And sometimes, the quietest season of your life becomes the place where your heart learns to remember Allah most sincerely. There comes a moment after someone leaves when the heart wants to run after them. You tell yourself you only want an explanation, just one conversation, one message, one final chance to understand what happened. So you open the chat, you type something, you delete it, you type again, then you stop. Because somewhere inside, You already know. You are not only looking for an answer, you are hoping they will come back. And this is where the real test begins. Not the test of whether they return, the test of whether you can remain at peace while they don't. Because when someone becomes distant, the heart starts creating stories. Maybe they are angry. Maybe I should apologize. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe if I try one more time, everything will go back to normal. And sometimes, a sincere conversation is exactly what is needed. Not every relationship should be abandoned at the first sign of difficulty. Sometimes you should communicate. Sometimes you should apologize. Sometimes you should forgive. Sometimes you should fight for someone you genuinely love. But there is another kind of chasing. The kind where you keep knocking on a door that has repeatedly shown you that it will not open. And that kind of chasing slowly changes you. You start measuring your worth by someone's response. Their silence controls your mood. Their attention determines your confidence. Their presence decides whether you feel complete. And without realizing it, you have handed someone else the keys to your inner peace. This is where spiritual growth asks you to pause. Not because you suddenly stop caring, but because you begin asking a deeper question. Am I trying to reconnect with this person? Or am I trying to escape the pain of being without them? That question can hurt. But sometimes, the truth that hurts you is also the truth that frees you. Because you cannot force someone to understand you. You cannot force someone to choose you. You cannot force a heart to remain where it no longer wants to remain. And you certainly cannot control the outcome simply by thinking about it every night. There is a beautiful place between effort and surrender. You do what is right. You speak honestly. You make amends when necessary. You leave the door open when wisdom tells you to. And then, you place the outcome with Allah. That is tawakkul. Not passivity. Not giving up. Not pretending you don't care. Tawakkul is doing what you can and refusing to destroy your heart over what you cannot control. So perhaps the real question is not, will they come back? Perhaps it is, who will I become if they never do? Will you become bitter or wiser? Will you close your heart completely? Or will you learn to love without losing yourself? Will you spend every night asking Allah to bring one person back? Or will you eventually say, Ya Allah, if their return is good for me, make the path easy, and if it is not, give me the strength to accept your wisdom. That prayer changes something inside you, because now, your peace is no longer dependent on a particular outcome. And this is where something unexpected happens. The person you were desperately trying to bring back slowly becomes less important than the person you are becoming. You begin sleeping peacefully again. You begin praying with more presence. You begin living instead of waiting. And one day, you may look back and realize the greatest answer was never their return. It was the moment your heart stopped chasing and started trusting. Because sometimes Allah does not change the situation immediately. Sometimes He changes the heart that is experiencing it. And that can be the beginning of a completely different life. How do you know you are actually changing? Not just emotionally. Not just because you stopped talking to certain people. Not because you suddenly became more religious in front of others. Real change is quieter than that. Sometimes nobody notices it except you. And perhaps one of the clearest signs is this. You stop needing everyone to understand you. There was a time when you wanted to explain every decision, every feeling, every boundary. You needed people to see your side. But slowly, you learn that being misunderstood does not always require a defense. You can remain sincere and let people think what they want. That is strength. The second sign is even deeper. You can miss someone without abandoning yourself. You still remember them. You still care. Maybe some nights you even make dua for them. But you no longer destroy your peace trying to bring them back. You can love someone and still let Allah decide their place in your life. The third sign is that you stop confusing attention with love. Someone texting you every morning is not necessarily proof that they are good for your soul. Someone constantly praising you is not necessarily someone who understands you. And someone's absence does not automatically mean you are worthless. You begin looking beyond attention and asking about character, sincerity, and what a relationship brings out of you. The fourth sign is that you start protecting your inner peace, not through arrogance, not by cutting everyone off, but through wisdom. You become more careful about what you listen to, what you entertain, what you repeatedly expose your heart to. You realize that not every conversation deserves your energy, not every argument deserves your response, and not every person deserves unlimited access to your emotional world. Then comes another sign. Your private relationship with Allah becomes more important than your public image. You begin making dua when nobody knows. You remember Allah when there is nothing to post. You pray because your heart needs Him, not because someone is watching. And perhaps this is where change becomes real, because spiritual growth is not always becoming more impressive. Sometimes it is becoming more sincere. Another sign is that rejection no longer completely destroys your sense of worth. You can be rejected and still know you have value. You can lose someone and still believe Allah has not abandoned you. You can hear no without assuming your entire future has ended. And finally, perhaps the deepest sign, you become able to surrender an outcome. You can say, Ya Allah, if this is good for me, bring it closer. And if it is not good for me, give me the strength to release it. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally understand that Allah sees what you cannot see. That is a different kind of peace. The soul is not necessarily changing because life suddenly becomes easy. Sometimes you know your soul is changing because the same situation no longer controls you the way it used to. The same silence that once made you panic now makes you reflect. The same rejection that once broke you now teaches you patience. The same goodbye that once felt like the end now reminds you that Allah remains. And perhaps that is the real sign. Not that everyone came back, but that you no longer need everyone to come back, to believe that your life can still be beautiful. There is a painful truth many hearts do not want to hear. Sometimes, the person you are waiting for is not the person you actually need. You may have spent weeks, months, even years thinking about one person, waiting for their message, waiting for their apology, waiting for them to understand what they lost. And somewhere in your heart, you may have created a future that depends on their return. You tell yourself, if they come back, everything will finally make sense. But what if your peace was never supposed to depend on that person coming back? What if the real gift is not their return, but your freedom from needing their return? Think about how strange the heart can be. When someone leaves, we sometimes remember only the beautiful moments. We forget the confusion, the anxiety, the unanswered questions, the nights when we felt unseen. We don't always miss the reality of the relationship. Sometimes we miss the possibility we created in our imagination. And that is why letting go can feel like losing a future that never actually existed. This is where surrender becomes powerful. You can ask Allah for someone, You can make dua for reconciliation. You can hope. There is nothing wrong with that. But there must come a point where your prayer becomes, Ya Allah, I want what is good for me more than I want what I have imagined for myself. That is a difficult prayer, because it means trusting Allah even when His answer does not look like the answer you wanted. Perhaps the person returns. Perhaps they don't. Perhaps the relationship is restored in a healthier way. Perhaps Allah opens a completely different door. You do not know, and neither do I. But Allah knows. So maybe the question is not, will they come back? Maybe it is, will I trust Allah if they don't? Because sometimes the miracle is not that the person returns. The miracle is that your heart becomes peaceful without them. You stop checking. You stop waiting. You stop imagining conversations that may never happen. And you begin living again. You begin praying with hope instead of desperation. You begin smiling without needing a particular person to see it. You begin understanding that your story was never held in another human being's hands. And perhaps one day you will look back and realize the person you thought you could not live without was not the destination. They were part of the journey, and the journey was leading you somewhere deeper, not toward another person first, but toward Allah. Because when your heart finally learns that, you no longer ask, who will complete me? You begin asking, Ya Allah, what are you teaching me through all of this? And that question can change everything. If you are alone right now, I want you to hear this slowly. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. And your current season does not define the rest of your life. Maybe someone you loved walked away. Maybe a friendship ended without the closure you wanted. Maybe the people you thought would always be there simply aren't. And yes, it hurts. You don't have to pretend that it doesn't. But don't let pain convince you that Allah has abandoned you. Sometimes we look at an empty space in our lives and immediately think, something is missing. But perhaps this is the moment to ask a different question. What is this season teaching me? Maybe it is teaching you patience. Maybe it is teaching you to stop chasing what cannot be forced. Maybe it is teaching you that your worth was never determined by someone's attention. Or maybe it is simply teaching you to turn toward Allah with a sincerity you had never experienced before. And remember, being alone does not mean you should reject people. Love people, forgive people, build good relationships, sit with family, keep good company. But don't make any human being the foundation of your heart. People change. People leave. People return. People make mistakes. But Allah remains. So if you are sitting alone tonight, don't immediately ask, who is coming back? Ask, who am I becoming? Because perhaps the greatest transformation is not when the empty seat beside you is filled. Perhaps it is when your heart becomes full of something deeper. Trust, patience, tawakkul, and closeness to Allah. Maybe this season is not the end of your story. Maybe it is the quiet chapter where your heart learns something it could never have learned in the noise. So breathe, make your dua, take the next step, and leave tomorrow in Allah's hands. Because you may not understand why certain people left, but you can still trust the one who knows where your heart is going. And one day, you may look back at this lonely season and realize you were never truly alone. You were being taught how to walk with Allah. If this video found you during a season of your life that you cannot fully explain, then maybe you were meant to hear this message today. And if you want more reflections on the heart, the soul, Ibn Arabi, Sufi wisdom, and the deeper journey toward Allah, subscribe to this channel. Not just for another video, but to stay connected to a place where we slow down, reflect deeply, and discover meanings that are easy to miss in the noise of everyday life. May Allah bring peace to your heart, guide your steps, and replace every painful uncertainty with something better than you imagined. Until the next video, take care of your heart.